Welcome to Digital Marketing Musings. Each episode, we choose a different expert to discuss the latest and greatest in digital marketing.
Today, Ilon Weeldreyer is joining us again to discuss the impacts of a cookieless future on different channels and industries, and to learn what advertisers can do to prepare. This is the second episode of a multi-part series, so please be sure to go back and listen to part 1 to get a lay of the land. I'm Gaia Reed.
And I'm Andrea McCartney.
And this is Digital Marketing Musings.
Thanks for tuning into Digital Marketing Musings. Today we're joined by our cookie expert, Ilon Weeldreyer, who is going to give us insight into the cookieless future and what that means for advertisers.
Ilon has been with Merkle since 2015 and is an associate director of performance media. He's worked with clients in B2B, entertainment, retail, financial services, and nonprofit, so his experience really runs the gamut. Welcome back to the show, Ilon.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
So, Ilon, I know when you last joined us, you had a caveat that you wanted to share. Do you want to include the disclaimer again for everyone?
Sure. So, this topic is very hot in the industry. There's a lot of unknowns. A lot of what we're discussing today might be correct today. It might be incorrect tomorrow. We do expect a lot of change over the next year and a half with all of these updates and changes to policy, changes to tech. So it'll be good for listeners to keep that in mind just because you'll want to take that into account.
Sounds like you're going to be a guest a few times as we have more updates that roll through as all this happens.
That's right. I'd be happy to come back and let you know what's going on.
Fantastic. Cool. So what industries or verticals are we expecting to be most impacted by the cookieless future?
So it's probably going to be pretty equal. The tech changes that are going to be occurring are going to affect everyone. There might be certain tactics that are less affected than others. There might be partners that an advertiser is running that might be less affected than others. But pretty much all advertisers are going to be affected equally. It again will depend on their portfolio, what they have running, what channels they're running, and how they're affected.
Cool. And I know we've mentioned advertisers that have higher ticket items may be more impacted versus ones that are lower ticket items, B2B versus B2C, all of those sorts of things as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's the possibility that longer, it's hard to say at this point. Some of the cookie preservation that would have been in place for long consideration windows, maybe that will be more impacted, like a long B2B consideration window, and it might affect retail less. However, the actual changes themselves are going to be to the third-party cookies not being able to be retained. So whether that's 1 day or 90 days, it quite possibly could have no difference.
At this point, knowing what we know, what should advertisers be doing to prepare? And we definitely realize this is like the $1 million question.
That's right. So I would say the same caveat as before. I won't say the entire thing, but people are very anxious. They don't know what's happening, or they don't know what to expect. And that is pretty universal across the entire industry. With these sorts of things, these sorts of large policy changes, it is good on Google's part to announce these things way ahead of time. We don't like sudden, unexpected changes that impact us immediately. And the good news here is that this will not be impacting us immediately. The soonest that we've heard this will occur is early 2022. But with something this large, we very well could expect it to be pushed back later in the year, possibly. The other good thing to keep in mind with all of these sorts of projects is that within something like Google, or even within something like Facebook, there are a few different teams, right? There's the Chrome team for Google. There's an entire collection of teams that work on the marketing platform side. And so they're not always in lockstep, I would say, or always completely aware of what one hand is doing and how the other hand will need to work. And that's not saying they're, completely disjointed and not communicating to each other. But when we talk about these sort of um, ideas or philosophical shifts in how we're going to do things, uh, one side could say, this is how we need to do this. And here, I'll pass it off to you. Now you figure out how to do it. And that process can take quite a long time. So with something like this, where a lot of things are still being figured out, things need to be developed, launched, ironed out, we could very well see this entire process take more than a year. So early 2022 being the earliest that we would expect, and whatever early means, January to March, somewhere in there. And that would probably be the very earliest we would expect. If we were to make some sort of educated guess, we'd probably say later in 2022, but that's very hard to say at this point. So what to do? Well, everyone wants to know what is going to happen to the tactics I'm running right now. Is remarketing still going to work? Is prospecting still going to work? Are dynamic ads still going to work? All of these questions. And the simple and most truthful answer is there will be something available, but we truly don't know the impact yet, and no one knows the impact. A lot of these things are still being developed, and we can't know the impacts of the new tactics until they're rolled out and tested.
You mean you don't have a crystal ball?
That's correct. That's correct. We can make pretty good assumptions on some things, and there are actually some things that we can state for certain aren't going to be impact, which I'll get to here in a second. But that is what people need to remember. They need to stay tuned. They need to remain aware of updates. They need to not overreact with every update because it very well could be changed the next month. So taking news with a certain amount of good measure and knowing how that's going to be an option for your program to either consider or not consider, those are the things that people are going to need to do over the next 9 to 12 months, testing out all of these different options and understanding what works best for their program. So some things. Recently, earlier in March, Google released a couple of updates. This is where Flock and Fleege really got boosted in awareness to most people in the industry, where a lot of times advertisers may have not been really paying attention to exactly what these proposals were.
I was just saying, can I pause you there and just
Yep.
kind of give a quick definition of what both Flock and Fleege are?
Right. So Flock and Fleege are there's a couple different things that are happening. So there's this thing you might have heard about called the privacy sandbox, and what that really is just a collection of integrations or APIs that would allow for privacy compliant exchange of data in some way, just ways that data can be used but in a privacy compliant way. And Flock and Fleege are based pretty much on anonymization through cohorts. So taking individual behavior and grouping those individuals so that it becomes privacy compliant, essentially. And then between the two, Flock is more geared toward like interest or behavioral, so you can probably think prospecting. Fleege is geared more toward how can we build audiences specifically for an advertiser, so you'd think of that more along the lines of Fleege. And you look at the partners who have gone back and forth in these open proposals, and you can align those pretty well to those tactics. So the folks who have done a lot of the back and forth on Fleege have been like your Criteos, your RTBs, your marketing platforms. And so that's probably how those are going to work. The exact technical details of how they're going to build these cohorts, how they're going to put them together, how the targeting and the measurement will work for those, that's all yet to be seen, but that's basically how that's going to work. And the privacy sandbox, Flock and Fleege, these aren't, exclusive or owned by Google. These are things that are going to be available to others. That also that is also true of, if you've heard of UID, which is something that's being headed up by Trade Desk, but is also open. to everyone, which is just another alternative identifier. I can get to that later, but that is what Flock and Fledge are. So that's the big announcement that Google made earlier in March. What that means for advertisers, again, we don't know yet. To be sure, in Q2 they're supposed to roll some of these things out and start testing, and then we'll have a better idea of the impact. In their initial tests, in their closed test, they found that things like the Flock audiences performed at about 95% of the efficiency of the same models built on third-party cookies. So they think it's going to be pretty good. So that's encouraging news, but yet we don't know the full impact at this point. Any questions on that before I move into other stuff?
It seems like the biggest concern is the impact on remarketing lists. So if everything goes according to plan with these new evolutions like Flock coming out, is there as much concern about diminishing volume of remarketing lists?
Potentially. So again, we don't know the how effective all of this will be. Something else that we are somewhat confident, but again, we don't know the answer. Something like a Google where, well, they're supposed to be classified as first-party cookies. So if they are first-party cookies and someone's using a global site tag and the cookie is read as a first-party cookie and is retained as a first-party cookie, the same percentage of users will be retained as they are now. However, again, things could change. So that's sort of how the remarketing landscape is going to go. Again, you could start to use other CRM-based things that if you want to go slightly further from remarketing into like reacquisition, retention, nurturing, those sorts of things based on identity, if you use an identity partner, those will be retained also. So as far as remarketing is concerned, same answer. The effectiveness of it, there might be some impact. There will be some sort of solution. Remarketing will not go away. It might look slightly different. They might go about that technology slightly differently, but there will still be something available.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about the impact on why advertisers and clients might want to focus more on first-party data and CRM lists? That seems to be the other piece of this that a lot of advice in the industry is pushing advertisers in that direction.
Yep. So you'll want to build out, if you're not already, you'll want to start building out or considering a private identity graph. And basically what you're trying to do is accumulate as much first-party and persistent data as possible. So what that means is things like first name, last name, email, telephone number, those things are very unlikely to change. And if you can connect those in a private identity graph to other identifiers, IDs, then you're going to be in a much better position. So you'll want to start collecting or harvesting that if you aren't already. And that might be something like when you go to your advertiser's homepage, box pops up and it says, get 10% off your first order by signing up for a newsletter, and you submit your email, you consent, and they collect that first party data. So that's probably what those sorts of things are going to look like, and those would be good to get in the works sooner than later. Again, the reason being that is going to be more persistent than relying on third-party cookies alone.
Gaia, I know when we were preparing offline for this episode, you had a couple examples that you really liked. One with a shared client of ours, and then another I think was CVS as a example.
Yeah, I had heard the example of CVS is well known in the industry for their CRM database and the way that they use their data, and they do a really great job of collecting data and incentivizing customers to sign up for their loyalty program and to kind of like check in with it. So when you go to buy something at CVS, you scan your loyalty card and you get the infinitely long receipt when you purchase something. And
Yeah.
the reason that you're incentivized to even scan the loyalty card is because the receipt has so many coupons that are really tailored to you and your purchase history, that they're trying to like give you value back. What we're really talking about, it seems like, is when you go onto an online website and you're trying to kind of duplicate that experience of getting someone maybe not waiting until they actually order. Like you go into CVS and you shop around and then you order and you scan your card. But it sounds like we're talking about kind of like as soon as you get onto the website, logging in and trying to get that identification of someone who's just shopping on the site initially, or browsing for the first time, just signing up for an account. And on a client of ours, I saw a really great example of this where they redid their loyalty program, and it used to be your normal points-based offer that just kind of accumulated over time. And when you went to log out, sometimes there would be some sort of offer for you. But often you didn't really have an incentive to like log in right when you got onto the site. But they redid it so that if you go and you log into your account as soon as you hit the site, you see offers immediately waiting for you. So $10 off over 50, or just for you, you got $15 off your next order. And they're personalized offers, so they're not just your site-wide offers that you see on the banner. And in my personal experience of shopping on the site, it definitely incentivizes me now every time that I go back to just check, is there something waiting for me that they didn't necessarily email me about or send me a push notification, but I just want to check and see if there's something waiting. And that definitely incentivizes me to, every time I visit the site, go ahead and log into my account.
Yeah, definitely a good customer experience. And I know we talk a bit more about loyalty in an upcoming episode. So definitely more to come from that perspective as well. So, Ilon, do you have a sense of like what programs will be unaffected by this change? It sounds like remarketing could be affected, but what are we expecting to kind of stay the same or be the safe havens for marketers?
So I'll try to run through some other things quickly, because each of these can spin off in many directions. So some of the other things that advertisers will look to use. So we already talked about first-party data, very important. Second-party data partnerships. So for example, if you're an airline, you'd probably look to partner with something like a hotel chain or a car rental. Just sharing that data, sharing your mutual first party, therefore becoming second party data, to gain that advantage. Things like site contextual. So for example, if you're whatever sites might be relevant to your advertiser. If you're a student loan advertiser, it's going to be important for you to advertise on things where upcoming college freshmen are going to be looking for information, whatever that might be. If you're a pet owner, you're going to be on pet owner sites, things like that. And those don't rely on cookies. Those are just merely, we know that pet owners are coming to these sites, so you're going to want to advertise on them. Walled gardens, Facebook and Google as examples, where you know the people you're targeting are logged in and therefore are confirmed as the identity that you expect them to be. They're the person you expect them to be. Measurement. So measurement is a tricky one because people are going to have to get comfortable with more modeled data. A lot of platforms are already incorporating modeled data into their reporting. It's only going to become more prevalent, and that's not going to revert. So advertisers are just going to, out of necessity, going to have to become more comfortable with modeled data, meaning most often a platform or a tech will look at actual conversions on site, and then look at all of the touches, the impressions they know they served, and make some assumptions about, even though we cannot deterministically track via a cookie this exposure to this conversion, we can make a fair amount of assumptions, and we're going to count it as a conversion related to this exposure. Something that will not change, and it's not necessarily new. There's like the concept of what's old is new again with this situation. This isn't necessarily new. They've been doing this for a long time. MMM, media mix modeling, that is still going to work. And in fact, it's going to work just as well as it did before. And so it's a very good solution for advertisers. The reason it works is because, again, it doesn't rely on cookies. It only relies on input-output. So where did you spend your dollars? Where did you serve impressions? And then on the back end, what was the output? What were the advertiser revenue that's been seen that quarter or that year? So MMM is a good thing to look at. Let's see if I jotted down anything else that might be good. Oh, I had mentioned previously these alternative ID resolution partners. So Google has also recently, after they came out with their announcements about Flock and Fleege and all this other stuff, they had said that their Google marketing platforms weren't going to participate in an alternative ID that replaces the cookie, as far as like Open Exchange and all that. But there are other vendors out there who are working on these. Probably the most prominent is the one headed up by Trade Desk, the Universal ID 2.0, or Unified ID 2.0. Don't remember which one it is. I think it's Unified. And what that basically will do, along with a lot of these alternative IDs, is it will do something like encrypt or hash an email, and that's how they convert it into IDs that are passed back and forth. And Google announced that Chrome, for the time being, is not going to prevent those from working. So this is where we get into the area where you really want to take a look at your existing platforms that you partner with, all the existing tactics you have, and go to them and say, what is your plan for when Chrome deprecates third-party cookies? What are you working on? Some of them are farther along than others, but everybody is working on something. As I mentioned, a lot of these are actively involved in the Fleege proposals. A lot of these are actively involved in UID, have already signed up and are partnered. So that's where you want to understand what the options are, and then begin to sort of estimate what the impact is. And you'll do that through testing different updates and releases that come through the next 9 to 12 months.
And I know you briefly mentioned about modeled conversion behavior. We've definitely heard on the Google Analytics side about the GA4 announcement for rolling out kind of a solution there for modeled conversion behavior. It sounds like regardless of what attribution partner advertisers are using, they should go and similarly confirm what the plans are for them rolling that out.
Yep.
So I know we've mentioned a bit about identity resolution partners. Can you go into what that is and how you would use them and why they're important as it relates to the cookieless feature?
Sure. So you're trying to push an audience, and that audience needs to go from one place to another, from the DSP to the SSP to the pub. Where in the past, third-party cookies went through this process of cookie syncing, something's going to need to replace that. Because if the browser interprets it as a third-party cookie, it will no longer be usable. And so that's where these encrypted IDs, hashed emails, things like that, are not interpreted as third-party cookies and therefore can be used. So that's what we talk about when we talk about identity resolution. There's other things where you could say identity resolution also equates to observing a user across the web and through a series of first-party cookie and other tiebacks, you can attach that to an actual PII record, which is great. That gets back to some of the stuff I talked about at the top of the options with first-party data. That first-party data isn't going to change. And so if you're sitting
Right.
on that private identity graph and you're able to continually push out these audiences for John Doe, Jane Doe to the pubs, you're going to be good to go. And any sort of future changes are much less likely to impact you because you're sitting on IDs that don't change, identifiers that don't change.
Are there any final tips or main takeaways for businesses and advertisers at this point, knowing what we know, to investigate?
I would say the number one tip is to, I guess, stay calm and stay tuned and be prepared to deal with a lot of uncertainty. No one is alone in this, and we'll all get through it. We'll find a way. The thing to keep in mind is, and this is sort of where you can, again, think about MMM. If you don't rely on the cookie, there's going to be some impact. Sorry, if you were relying on a cookie and you look to some alternative, a third-party cookie and look to some alternative, there's going to be some impact on your ability to target. In some ways, it's going to get worse. There's going to be some sort of impact. How big that is, we don't know yet. It could be as little as 5%. Maybe it's going to be 30%. But then we look at other situations where if you begin, it's going to be a pleasant result possibly. If you begin to emphasize more on first-party data and your results are actually better, you could actually see better performance in some situations, in some tactics in the future. So that's really where, as far as targeting is concerned, it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen at this point. As far as measuring, same deal. But the thing is digital is not going away. There's going to be digital advertising. There are going to be methods for doing digital advertising, whether it be prospecting, remarketing, direct buys, any number of the things that we've already been able to do up until now. We will continue to be able to do them. It may look different, and we'll find out over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years what that looks like, but we will be able to do it. So remaining flexible, remaining nimble will be the key to success.
I think a lot of the things that we heard throughout this episode, if I were to summarize, leaning in to first-party data sets and trying to actively collect them. And with that, incentivizing site browsers to provide you with more data on site more quickly. Begin talking to attribution partners about what they're doing, particularly around any like modeled behavior. And identity resolution partners, making sure that you understand if you're going to move forward with testing into one, or better utilizing one if you already have an identity resolution partner. Any final takeaways in terms of what individual channels could be doing to help in preparing for this change, or specific impacts?
I think we pretty well covered it. Display is going to be impacted more than search, just because the nature of it. You're going out to the wide web, the open exchange, and you're trying to find people. You're not sitting on a SERP and waiting for them to come to you, and then that relationship is much more direct, and it isn't reliant on view through. There's going to be other channels that benefit from some of these things. So again, if you improve your first party data, you're going to be able to do stuff like build out better email. You're going to have more robust email campaigns. You're going to be able to build out direct mail. You'll have more robust direct mail campaigns just because you sit on a larger amount of first party data. So as far as the most impacted, it's probably going to be display. Search, not so much. Really not email, probably not direct mail. Those last two, though, will possibly benefit from things like the first party, gathering more first party data.
Great.
All right. Sounds like
Any
that's
other
it.
questions? Yeah.
I was say, sounds like that's
Until
it for this
a month from now.
episode.
Yeah, until a month from now, things are radically different. But
Yeah,
if there are changes, we'll be back and we'll talk about them.
for sure. For sure. I have no doubt that you're going to be a regular, reoccurring guest on the show.
I'll be
Anyway,
happy to be here.
fantastic. And that's it for this episode of Digital Marketing Musings. Huge thanks to our guest, Ilon, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Stay in touch and let us know what you want to hear about next by emailing us at digitalmarketingmusings@merkleinc.com. Also, stay tuned for our next episode on loyalty solutions, which is going to dovetail off of some of the great content that Ilon talked through today.
Definitely. And if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do so and rate and review us. It helps others find us. And also, please be sure to tell a friend about the show. Until next time, I'm Andrea McCartney.
And I'm Gaia Reed.
Bye.